should remind you of our special sponsor this evening, St. Joseph's Communications, who sponsors the Lived It Lectures, and I'm sure you all remember them as the publisher of Wedding Bells magazine, amongst other things. A couple of announcements. There has been some questions about how to ensure that if you go to the Vimeo site, if you want to get credit for having attended that lecture electronically, how do you do so? I've been told to tell you, simply post a comment. If you post a comment, it can be simply, I want to be counted, put your name in, then we can collect that and check you off as having attended that lecture. Okay, so I've been told that that will work, and that allows us to effectively take attendance from those who want to be counted. Oh yes, again, I apologize that we have been bounced up here. We are in competition with the Canola Council of Canada, who had more cash than I did, so they got the auditorium, and I haven't warned this evening's speaker that they're going to have the Second City improv troupe downstairs. So there's competition for the entertainment too. And I don't know if you can talk a good line about canola, you may be able to crash their party later on. And I'm not sure how you cater an affair for the Canola Council, but I'll bet you don't use butter in much of anything. Now, a key confession I have to make. I know many of you are eagerly awaiting news as to who is in and who is out of the upstart, and I apologize, I can't tell you today. We've had some challenges with reviewers trying to link up with their assigned companies, emails going to spam and missed messages. Bottom line, I've got about 80–85% of the opportunities reviewed with comments, but it's not fair to those that haven't been. And to compound that, I'm taking off for a week as of tomorrow morning. So I am leaving my colleagues who haven't finished their jobs yet until next Friday, and I'm planning on sending emails out by next Friday. Okay, my apologies, but you know, you should be working on your opportunity. You should be developing your market intelligence and all that good stuff anyway. So don't just sit there waiting. It's a bit of an artificial cutoff, who moves ahead, who doesn't. I assume you're all planning on moving ahead, regardless of what the decision is. So keep working. If you've met with an advisor, bug your advisor if you want more help. Just proceed, and we will get you the decision as soon as possible. Okay, that's it for the administrative stuff. Delighted to welcome this evening's speaker, Dr. Lisa Crossley. And I do want to thank one of my colleagues, Linda Quatrin, who has made the introduction to Lisa and brought her here to Mars. The title of Lisa's talk is Building a Better Deal. And I don't want to try and steal any thunder from that, but I'll give you a little background. Lisa, and I'm quoting some things here from a Globe and Mail article. Lisa originally thought I wanted to be a doctor. My first degree was in anatomy and cell biology. Then I discovered I didn't want to do any of the actual doctoring stuff, something I can sympathize with. She went on then into engineering at Queen's, got a PhD, did some postdoc work, and then moved to Boston. Worked for a company managing their global biopharmaceutical manufacturing. She came back from there to Canada to McMaster as a professor in chemical engineering. And again, quoting from this article, I ran into this professor of chemistry who had this amazing technology, but didn't understand the applications. I don't necessarily, to this day, understand the technology, but I can see the applications. And from that collaboration in 2005, Natrix was created. It was a different name at the start off, but it's a spin-off from McMaster. and it has gone on to optimize the platform technology, develop a robust commercial manufacturing process, and this is basically, Natrix Separations is a supplier of chromatography products to the life science, food, beverage, and water markets, all pretty significant markets. So obviously Natrix has grown because in 2008 they moved into a 24,000 square foot facility in Burlington. And I'm going to leave it there and let Lisa tell you the story, I guess, of Natrix and some of the exciting developments that have taken place recently. Lisa.
Okay. Probably should have asked this earlier, but how do I advance the slides?
You need this.
Okay.
Green to go ahead, red to go back.
Green to go ahead, red to go back.
I'm not sure who you pointed to.
Okay. All right, that worked fine. So thank you very much for having me. I was very honored to be invited to participate. I think this is a great initiative. I love the idea of the lecture series, and I particularly like the way that it's got sort of the he said, she said component where you get lectures by venture capitalists and other people from one side of the table, and then the lived it series where you actually get to hear the real truth from the entrepreneurs. So today I want to tell you a little bit about our company, but mostly focus on talking about how to build a better deal, how to get a new venture funded, how to get the best possible deal terms for a new venture, and what are the critical components as an entrepreneur, particularly if it's your first venture, in terms of putting together a business, growing the business, and getting it funded. So I'll talk a little bit about our company, the technology which we did license and now actually own, but that came out of McMaster University. We'll talk about fundraising. In total, I've raised $21 million for the company, which for a Canadian company is actually a pretty substantial raise. Then I want to talk about the three critical elements for building a better deal. And those would be a business plan. I know that you've heard a lot about business plans in your lifetime, but specifically give you an example of what with our business plan, we articulated as our go-to-market strategy, because I think that's the single most important thing you should focus on in your business plan if you're looking at acquiring venture capital financing. And then the other two critical elements for building a good deal are your advisory team. That's particularly important if this is your first experience in building a new venture. Having the right advisors is going to get you there a lot quicker with a lot less pain. And managing the actual transactions, so managing the deals. And then a quick summary. So introduction to Natrix. As Tony mentioned, we're a supplier of high-performance separation products to a number of very large markets within the life sciences industry broadly. So veterinary pharmaceutical, human and veterinary vaccines, human biopharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, so high-value proteins from commodity food products, and some water applications as well. The company was founded in 2005. We actually incorporated in October of 2004 so that we could start to get term sheets from various investors. It was formed to commercialize a technology that was developed in the Department of Chemistry at McMaster University by two very brilliant membrane researchers, Dr. Ron Childs and Dr. Alicia Mika. The inventors brought the science, and my side was really the business experience, the network, and the knowledge of the application. So my background was very much on the industrial side. I had worked at a startup in Boston. It was a biopharmaceutical company that went public in August of 2000 on the strength of the therapeutics division's result, and the therapeutics division at the time was myself and one other guy. So we had a lot of experience in building value in companies, starting from the ground, absolutely ground zero level, and building value. And the company had one of the most successful IPOs of any biotech company in the space at the time. So really positive experience for me, and I certainly learned a lot. The company, Natrix, is privately owned. It's backed by major institutional investors from Canada and from the United States. In Canada, we're backed by BDC Venture Capital and by Jove Investments. Jove Investment acquired the seed fund portfolio, which was called CMDF, Canadian Medical Discoveries Fund, from MDS Capital. So when we first were founded, it was MDS Capital and BDC. In the Series B round, it was Jove Investment, BDC, an investor out of California, D.E. Shaw Ventures. And I will highlight that it is very unusual, even as an East Coast US-based company, to attract a California investor. The Californian investors tend to very much play in their own backyard, so we were really lucky to be able to attract them. D.E. Shaw, the parent company, is a $35 billion financial services company rather. Most people know them as a hedge fund. On any given day, they trade 5% of the New York Stock Exchange, which is a huge amount of money. So they're a really nice investor to have because they have a lot of money. Their venture capital fund is a $300 million evergreen fund, which just means that at any one point in time, they have $300 million available to invest. So if you're a company looking to grow your business and really become a major global player, you want to get involved with investors who have that kind of capital available to them so that they can fund inorganic growth, acquisitions, that kind of thing. We currently are pretty lean. We employ 40 people in this economy. It's very much to your benefit to run lean. It's something that investors also like a lot. We employ 40 people, 35 in Canada. That's across all functions, and 5 in the States, including my VP of Marketing, who's here for moral support. So our US presence is very much sales and marketing focused, and that's pretty typical for a lot of Canadian companies, that you will have some US base, and we tend to retain R&D here because of the favorable tax credits, but typically you'll have some sales and marketing presence in the States. So this is a picture of our corporate headquarters. We used to be in a 2,400 square foot space around the corner from where we are now. We're in a 25,000 square foot space and are already running out of room. So it's the classic startup problem. It's the problem you want to have as a startup, is running out of space. So in our first facility, we had people in the halls. We kept saying the next step was we were going to go vertical. You'd have to sit under somebody's desk, because we were that packed. But it's a very good problem to have. It means the business is thriving. So we're now in a much larger facility. We have admin, finance, R&D, applications development, quality, pilot line, and a full-scale commercial manufacturing line with a capacity of 25 million square feet of membrane per year. So we actually have a capacity analogous to or comparable to many of the top membrane companies globally. So it's a very significant manufacturing facility, and it's ISO certified. Excuse me. We've developed a unique patented chromatography technology. I won't get into too many of the details. I won't assume you're all biochemists, but basically chromatography is a way of separating molecules very specifically. So you can purify human drugs, you can make vaccines, you can make clean water by removing heavy metals. So it's a very selective kind of separation. So I've been known to describe the technology as coffee filters on steroids. So it's like a filter, but instead of removing sand based on size, it actually captures something based on charge or specific molecular interactions. So you can get very, very specific separations, removing heavy metals from water but leaving behind fluoride. You can purify biological drugs. You can take a high-value protein out of egg whites and leave the egg whites intact so that they can be resold as a pourable egg white product. So it's a very sophisticated, selective separation method, but it's very, very simple. It's like a coffee filter. It's very easy to operate, very scalable, very inexpensive. And the technology, for those of you who are, like myself, science geeks, is a hydrogel, and hydrogels are used in all kinds of medical applications, typically contact lenses or hydrogels, but it's a hydrogel formed within something that looks a lot like Tyvek. So those envelopes you get things in that you can never get open and there's absolutely no way into them, that's a membrane, that's a non-woven. So we form the hydrogel within the non-woven support. It's a lot like making French toast. So you actually make your chemistry, it polymerizes within the thickness of your membrane like the egg does, and that's what does the separation. So the company initially raised $2 million. That was we got our first term sheet in December of 2004, closed on the transaction April 1st, 2005. So our anniversary is April Fool's Day. It's also my VP of Marketing's birthday, so it's all coming together. We initially went out to raise a $750,000 seed round, and that's a pretty typical raise for a seed round in Canada, and they tend to be a little bit larger in the States. And we initially went just MDS Capital, and when I moved up to Canada from the States, I spent a lot of time consulting for venture capital companies in Canada and in the United States, and that was a really positive thing for us in terms of starting the company, because it meant that we had some established contacts in that industry. And a warm introduction will get you everywhere in venture capital. You never want a cold call on a VC. So we were looking for about $750,000, do about 6 months of proof of principle work. We were very fortunate in that MDS was very interested. They chose to syndicate the investment, which means bring in other investors, approached BDC. The seed fund at that time existed. It doesn't exist anymore at BDC, but they still are active investors. But they were very proactive, very forward-thinking, and decided, you know what, you need $2 million to get the company 2 years along. It'll give you a chance to really achieve some measurable milestones, and you'll be in a much better position to go for the next raise. So instead of spending the first 6 months trying to balance product development and proof of principle with extensive fundraising, we were able to really concentrate on developing the technology and building a business. So that was wonderful. We used the initial $2 million to lease office and lab space, hire a small team of R&D scientists, file our IP, so continued patent prosecution, and for some initial business development. And the initial $2 million investment was tranched, which is pretty common, especially at the seed stage. So I believe it was 600, 600, 800. So each milestone payment would be made contingent on achieving certain specific technical and business development related deliverables. And I think that's you're not going to have a lot of options at the seed stage because you don't have a lot to offer investors, so you don't have a lot of leverage. But it's actually quite positive to have a tranche deal, provided that you had a lot of input in defining those milestones, because it does keep you really focused on your business plan. 'Cause it's easy once you get started to get a little distracted by how exciting the technology is, or some off-plan opportunity. And it's a cliche, but it's certainly true in the beginning that there is no such thing as a good off-plan idea. You really need to define your business plan and stick with it. So a tranche deal can actually help you stay focused if you're not that kind of personality on your own. The next round, however, which we closed on in the spring of last year, was a substantially larger round. So it was $19 million. At that point, if you're looking for that level of financing, you're typically looking at bringing on a U.S. investor. We typically cap out with the Canadian venture capital investments around the Series B level. And when you're going beyond that to Series C mezzanine, you're definitely looking at moving outside of Canada. We just don't have that kind of capital available here. But we were very fortunate in that our existing investors chose to participate. They had what we call rights to participate. So they were able to, or they had the right to participate at their pro rata amount, so based on what they'd invested before. And we were fortunate in that they very much wanted to participate at their pro rata allotment. So that was very helpful to us in going out to raise in the States, in that it was a clear validation of the value proposition from investors who'd been involved from the beginning. We were also very much helped by having contacts there, both through the investors we currently had, my own contacts, our chairman of the board. Very much when you're moving into the States, you need to have that network established. So if you don't know a venture capital investor in the States and you're looking to raise in the States, you have to find someone in your network who does, because you do not want to cold call the US VCs. So that money we used to move the company to new space, again, just around the corner in Burlington. It's a 25,000 square foot facility. We constructed a commercial scale manufacturing line. It's a beautiful thing if you like stainless steel, real thing of beauty. Expand the senior management team, so I basically was the senior management team for 3 years. And at that point, we brought on a CFO, a VP sales, VP ops, VP marketing. And that gave me a lot more bandwidth to focus on the overall strategy for the company and any additional fundraising that might be necessary going forward. We also expanded the sales and marketing team, so really the sort of foot soldiers in our team within the United States. And we went forward with our commercial launch. So our products are now for sale in the VWR catalog throughout North America. We sell product in Europe through a distributor, and we sell direct ourselves into a number of different process scale markets, and have been getting good traction with the products. With that raise, we went from term sheet to close in 6 months. With the seed raise, it was a little faster, it was about 4 months. Both of those timelines are pretty aggressive. So if you're looking to raise, you want to give yourself a minimum of 6 to 9 months from the first conversations with the potential investors through to close. So if you're looking at raising a follow-on round, you want to make sure you have at least 9 months of runway when you go out. Ideally, you want to make sure you have considerably more than that, because your leverage, your bargaining power goes down with your bank account. So the less cash you have in the bank account, the more you're going to get the screws put to you by the venture capitalists in terms of valuation, because they know they've got you over a barrel. And so the 3 critical elements for building a better deal. For any venture capital financing, you need to have a great business plan, a really strong advisory team, and you need to manage the heck out of the transaction. So you need to be really actively involved in the closing of your transaction. So the business plan, the terms of any deal will only be as good as the business plan you put before prospective investors. And when I talk about deal terms, I'm talking about the variables in any deal. So what's potentially up for negotiation? What are you going to argue with them about, prospective investors? Valuation is right up there. How much is the company worth? you're not going to have a lot of room for argument if it's a seed stage investment. So if you're at the proof of concept stage, you really don't have a lot that you can argue with an investor in terms of valuation. And at the seed stage, I really recommend take the money that's offered you, start the company, build the business, worry about valuation at the next stage. But when you're going to close a seed deal, you don't have enough to really bargain with investors. And the valuation, the value of your company, it's much like a house. It's worth whatever people will pay for it. So if you go out and you get term sheets saying your business is worth X and you feel it's worth 10X, you're wrong. It's worth X. So you just come to terms with that, take the money, start the business, grow the value, argue valuation at the next stage. But take the opportunity that's given you. If money's on the table, if that's what the valuation is that you're getting from various parties, that is the value of the company. Start the company, you'll be able to grow the value and benefit from that on the next round. But at the seed stage, just take the money. ESOP, so employee stock option plan. So your investors should be anxious to carve out a pool, typically we would say about 15%, can be a little higher, of stock options that will be available to employees. And you need that to incent potential management hires, and as well as people in just regular staff positions. But certainly if you're going to bring on a really strong management team, you need to have a certain level of stock options available that you can use to attract them, because then they've got skin in the game. Then your management team is really motivated to make the company succeed and to make it succeed on as little venture capital money as possible. Because the more venture capital you raise, the more your equity gets diluted. So it's a really good both carrot and stick for a management team. Liquidation preferences. So you can have straight or participating liquidation preferences. And basically this means that at a liquidation event, so if you exit via M&A or IPO, the investors will get their money first. And they can either get their money out and then they're done, or they can have participating liq prefs. And in that case, they could get 1.5 times, and the straight liquidation prefs can also be multiple. So they could get 2 times their money out, 1.5 times, 1 time. The seed stage 2 is pretty typical. 1.5 would be a pretty reasonable deal, in my opinion. Tony may argue with me, but participating pref shares are also very common at the seed stage. It means that they'll take their money out, and then they will still participate as if their pref shares converted to common shares. So if they own 70% of the company, they'll take their money out, then they'll get 70% of what's left. So they'll take their original 10 million out, and then they'll get 70% of the 500 million that you sell your company for. So, if possible, you want to go for the straight like prefs, but good luck with that. So, if that works out for you, give me a call. You can do my next negotiation, because the participating definitely the standards. Redemption rights. So a lot of investors will have a right to redeem their shares after, say, 5 years. It's a pretty standard term. And that means that if you have not gone through a liquidation event in 5 years, they can call their money and you have to give it back to them some way or other. If possible, you want to avoid redemption rights. Again, at the seed stage, it's not that easy, but it's something you can renegotiate at the next fundraising. So I generally don't worry too much about deal terms at the seed stage. By all means, get the best you can, but don't get too hung up on some of these parameters, because you can renegotiate at the next investment. Ideally, we negotiated into our Series B no redemption rights, so they don't have the right to call the money after 5 years. They can't force you to sell. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you should have a business plan that tells you that within 3 to 7 at the outside years, the company's going to be able to either go public or go through an M&A if you're going for a venture capital deal. So it's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it's something to just keep your eye on. Anti-dilution protection, full ratchet or weighted average, and those are terms you can look up on the internet. It's not particularly important which one you go with, but it basically says that if you go through a down round, so if on your next financing, the company's value is pegged at less than what it was when you went through the first round, then the investors have a right to gain more shares so that it's equivalent. So they still have 70% of the company, basically, if they had 70% before. Again, I basically wouldn't allow that into a deal. So if you have any bargaining power around that, it's a term I would not be particularly keen on having in your term sheet. Preemptive rights to participate, not necessarily a bad thing unless you've somehow solicited an investor you can't stand. This just means that they have the right in follow-on financings, if they have the money, to participate at the amount, at the percentage ownership amount that they had before that round. So if you have investors that you like, it can be a very good thing. And they don't have to exercise that right, but it gives them the option. Approval rights, very common that they'll have to approve certain types of transactions, expenditures over a certain level, any kind of acquisition of real estate, other companies, that kind of thing. Board seats, so you can get into some debates here where if you're going through a substantial raise and you have an investor who wants to participate at a very small level, so let's say 1 or 2 million out of 20, they might want a board seat. No, you can't have 18 board members, so you need to make sure that the board seats go to the investors who have the most money in the company, because otherwise you're going to have 18 captains trying to steer the ship. So, critical elements from the point of view of potential investors. Management team, it's a cliche I'm sure you've heard over and over again, but it's true, so I'm going to say it anyway. Investors would rather invest in a B technology and an A team than an A technology and a B team. 100% true. And that's because a proven team knows how to commercialize the technology, understands what's important, and can drive a B technology to a really good ROI, whereas a team that's going to falter, that's really going to struggle, can absolutely kill an A technology. Market information, this is the single most important thing in my opinion in a business plan. What's your go-to-market strategy? What's the market size? What's the market pain? How do you address it? Intellectual property, and this can be a go, no-go for investors. Do you have sufficient protection, and do you have freedom to operate? So you may have a lot of patents, but if you did a patent map, do you actually have the freedom to use that intellectual property, or do you need to license in IP from somewhere else? Are you going to be infringing? That's something that you really need to get, not necessarily a formal FTO opinion, which can cost 25 to 50 to 100,000, depending on who you're getting it done by, but you need to get some good legal advice on what's my freedom to operate with the IP I have. Budget, use of funds, obviously they're going to want to know what you're going to do with their money. And are you going to make good decisions? So if your plan is, the first thing I'm going to do is going to hire 100 people and carry that head count, and it's going to be, 90% of them are going to be VPs who all make 6 figures, you're never going to get funded. So you need to show that you're going to make smart decisions with the money that they're going to give you. And exit strategy. You have to be able to show that you have a clear exit strategy. If you're aiming for an M&A, who would buy you? What would be their motivation? How much have they paid for other acquisitions that they've made? What's a typical multiple in the space? So is it 3 to 5 times revenues? Is it typically lagging revenues? Is it forecasted revenues? So that you can give your investors a sense of, I think this company can sell for $500 million in 5 years, or 10 million in 5 years, but at least their expectations are clear from the beginning. And they're going to want to know timing. So a typical VC is going to want to hear 3 to 5 years from now, I can get out. Chances are that timeline's going to dilate once they're in, but that's what they want to hear up front. So the business plan's purpose is to articulate your value proposition for potential investors. So people should be able to read a business plan. I would say you want to try to get it in 25 pages or less. Investors have the shortest attention span of any human being on the planet, like a gnat. So at a board meeting where you're surrounded by investors, you can't have anything shiny in the room because that's, oh, shiny thing. So you gotta have, Tony's an investor, so I'm insulting him, but never getting invited back. In a minute, I'm gonna show you our business plan, our slides that I used with our board. There's a lot of color and some pictures, because that's how I keep them engaged. So you need to keep in mind that you are pitching to very busy people who see a lot of business plans, and you need to be able to give them your message very clearly, concisely, in as few words as possible. And the more graphs you can use, the better. Focus on the market. What are your target markets? What are the sizes of those different markets? How long do you think it'll take you to penetrate those markets? So how long to get a certain market share? Don't use the standard, in 5 years I can get 10% of this market. Why? Because in 5 years I can get 10% of this market. Not good enough. What are the unmet needs in that market? How does your technology or products address those unmet needs? And so how are you going to get to that market share? Rule of thumb, and this is something we used more in the States than I've heard up here, but I'll say it anyway. At a minimum, most investors want to see that you're going after a market that's worth $400 million, that you can get 10% of that market share within 4 years. It's sort of the rule of 4s, 400 million, 40 million, 4 years. So I haven't heard that as much up here, but that was very common down in the States. And the exit strategy, depending on the investor, you need to be able to demonstrate a potential ROI of 5 to 10x. So you want to be able to show them if they put 50 million in, they're going to get 250 to 500 million out, which is why you don't want to go for 50 million. You want to try to run leaner than that. But with 20 million in, we're looking at trying to exit with Natrix for anywhere between well, basically with these investors, between 200 million and 500 million, but typically for a 5 to 10x, so 100 to 200 million. The US investors will very much push for a 10x ROI. Not necessarily going to get it, but that's very much what they'll be aiming for. So your business plan needs to show revenue projections that support that level of ROI. And you can work with the investor. You need to consider investors your friends, your advocates, your best mentors, your strongest advocates, and your best advisors. So you can work with the investor even before you've closed a deal on what are you looking for from an exit, what do we have to do to grow the business, because there's a lot of different ways to fund a business. And I've found with a lot of investors, they would rather give you more money, but see that that gets you to exit earlier and at a higher valuation, than give you less money and see you not get to the same value. So it's actually not that difficult to raise significant amounts of money if you've got a business plan that justifies that they're going to get their money back. And sometimes that's easier to do on more money, especially if you're trying to do it quickly. An example, so in our business plan, we described our go-to-market strategy as follows, and you don't have to get too involved in the technical details. I just want to sort of illustrate the way that we have expressed our go-to-market strategy for the investors. We're targeting 3 very large market verticals within the separations industry. They're growing, they're global, there's a lot of opportunities here, and they're biotech separations, basically biomanufacturing, making biological drugs, food and beverage processing, so the nutraceutical market, and water and wastewater treatment. And the total value of these verticals globally is $9 billion, so big market. That's one of the first things you want to show. And then we segmented the market, and we went through and said within each of these verticals, there are a number of segments, and I should say, when I say we, Chris did this, I really had no hand in it, but I presented it to the board as my own, so that's really my contribution. So you want to be able to segment the market and say that there are different segments within the market that will give us revenue in the near term, in the medium term, and in the long term. And here's how we're going to balance our portfolio so that we're going after opportunities that some of the long-term opportunities might be the biggest opportunities, but they're going to take a while to generate revenue for the business. And you want to try to get to cash flow positive as soon as possible. So you want to be self-sustaining as soon as possible. So you need to balance that portfolio. So we looked at trends in the market, and we decided that our technology really addresses the trends, really fits in well with the trends. So right now, everybody in bioprocessing is going to disposables. It limits the risk of batch-to-batch cross-contamination. So with issues like mad cow disease, where there are some diseases that you can't even detect the vectors that cause them. So if you manufacture, it's like making macaroni and cheese in the same pot. It goes through the dishwasher, but did you really get everything before you made the next batch of macaroni and cheese? If you toss the pot every time, there's no risk of cross-contamination. So there's been a big push with the regulatory agencies who regulate human medicines and human vaccines towards disposable technology. Our technology is inherently disposable, so we really fall in line with that trend. So we're very much in line with where the market is moving, and that's important. There's also increasing market pressures to reduce manufacturing costs, increase yields, and rapidly scale. And our technology fits in with all of those market trends. So we're positioned very nicely for where the market is going. And that's something you want to be really careful about is, does your technology fit where the market is now, or where it was a year ago, or where it's going? Because you definitely need to be where it's going, or there's not going to be the potential to grow the business. Our value to the customer, so this is something you definitely need to be able to articulate to investors. In particular, what are the unmet needs, and how do your products or technology address those unmet needs? Because you want to have a market pull and not a market push. So it can't be some cool technology that nobody's really going to be interested in. It has to be a product that people need, that they've been looking around for, that there's absolutely no viable alternative. So if you're going to conferences and everybody is complaining at every conference about this downstream bottleneck, which is the big buzzword in our industry, and your technology solves that problem as ours does, then you have market validation. So you need to find what are the actual problems, not just what you think as a technologist are the problems, but speak to the end users, get out there with the prospective customers. What do they think is their pain, and how does your product or technology address that? Then Chris did his MBA, so he is really good at pictures, drawings with colors and bubbles. And these bubble things go over really well with investors, so I highly recommend them. I don't even know what this one means, but it really went over well with the board. So what we're looking at demonstrating here is that there's a sweet spot where you have high competitive performance of your products and high value to the customer. So you can be able to charge a lot of money for this product, and it's really going to make people happy. There's nothing else out there. It does 10 times better than any competitive product, and it's a very high value. So it solves a really significant problem. So up in the top right quadrant, those are the markets and the applications that we really wanted to go after. So you want to try to segment your market and say, where do I have the greatest value to the customer? And those are my first target markets. Doesn't mean the other markets aren't going to ultimately be of value, but those are the beachheads you want to attack first. Again, in value prop by segment, we're looking at where are the unmet needs. And so for us, we ended up defining unmet needs as certain applications, certain market segments, and those would be the first ones that we would go after. They may not be the highest value, but they would be the ones where we would be able to get near-term wins. And investors really like near-term wins. You just have to make sure that you keep an eye on what the business needs to do to grow. So you need to make sure that you have a balanced portfolio of not just those near-term wins, but the highest value wins, many of which will be longer term. So we looked at what are the typical times to market for technologies into these various market segments that we had identified as being very attractive to us, where we addressed unmet needs, where we had high value to the customer and high competitive performance, and then tried to create a balanced portfolio. So again, we're looking at profitability versus time to market, and again, looking to try to get that balance within the portfolio. So we ended up from there, oops, I think it, okay. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back, hang on. We ended up from there deciding that there were some markets that would be very difficult to attack on our own, but that would still be of interest to us. So we would go after specific markets through direct sales, and we would develop a direct sales force to attack those markets, but we would also go after other markets through channel partners or strategic alliances. So some of these markets don't have a lot of synergies with some of the other markets that we're going after, or like the lab market, you're selling to hundreds of thousands of researchers. As a startup company with limited funds, you cannot employ a sales force that can go after a customer base like that. So you need to go through a channel partner. Where you want to go direct is where there's going to be a lot of application support. So you're going to have a lot of hand-holding of customers, a lot of technical involvement. Your expertise is going to be a core competency to access those markets. With more diffuse markets or markets where your company's core competency really doesn't play. So for us, that might be microelectronics. We don't have a lot of base experience in that. With those, you want to go with a channel partner and really leverage either their expertise or their customer base or their sales force. So with working with VWR, they have 500 sales reps, and we have 5. They're probably the best choice for the hundred thousands of customers in the lab market, and we'll go after the process scale customers who require a lot of technical expertise and support. So we decided that our focus for 2009, 2010, and initially for 2008 when we were first looking at segmenting the markets would be going after the markets with the unmet needs and performance or value, because we had truly a disruptive technology, even though again that's a cliche, for those markets, and then markets where we could establish a strategic partnership. So a market where we could leverage someone else's experience, expertise, customer base, sales force to gain access to that market fairly quickly. And then in markets where we had a high competitive value, but there were existing players, and so it was going to be more a market push than a market pull, we decided we would delay those for several years until the company was more mature. Cool. So here's my, oops. Go back. Okay. So this is smart art from PowerPoint. I discovered it over the summer, and I really like it. I can make little MBA diagrams now by myself. So I made these over the summer, and I'm really excited about them. And the investors love them. They have 5 different colors, and they're pictorial. So I don't think they even read what was on them or listened to anything I was saying, but they were really excited about this board package. This is the best board package so far. So highly recommend when you're pitching to investors, bright colors and fancy diagrams. Here, we're basically just looking at time to market, which for the lab market is short. So this is one of the market segments in our portfolio where we're getting near-term revenues. You want to try to define what are the barriers to entry into any given market that you're thinking of addressing. What are your competitive advantages? What's the anticipated gross margin? So can I actually make money in this market, or am I going to have to do ridiculous volumes to get any kind of actual profit into the company? And who are your key competitors? And then longer term, or not longer term, but more in depth for yourselves within the company, how are those competitors going to react when I enter the market? What am I going to do? when they react that way. So you need to do some scenario planning around who your competitors are and how they're going to behave when you enter the marketplace, or you can just get killed even after going for what you think is a very successful launch. And then what's the total addressable market? So what, if all else were equal, everything was a perfect, if it were a perfect world, how much this market could I capture? So the lab market is worth about $4 billion. Our products address about 25% of that market. So hopefully I did the math on that right, 12.5%. At any rate, let's just move on before anybody does the math for me. Nutraceuticals, so this is a time to market that's in the medium term. So again, part of balancing the portfolio. And again, we're looking at lower margins here, but very high volumes. So, and 60% margin is pretty darn respectable, so no complaints there. Total addressable market here is $1 billion. So that's something that investors love to see. You want to try to show that you're going after some really significant markets. And again, have to define your barriers to entry, what we typically refer to as differential competitive advantages. So what differentiates you from the competitors in the market and the products that are already available, or technologies that are serving that market, even if it's not meeting the needs perfectly. And then, oh, darn it. Okay. So this market is worth about $1 billion, but the interesting thing about the biopharm market is you're going to get the highest multiple on exit, or the highest value at IPO, from being a presence in the biopharm market. So even though this is one of the hardest markets to go after because it requires a lot of application support, so a lot of resource allocation, a lot of investment, it's $1 billion, which is similar to the nutraceutical market, and the nutraceutical market is an easier win. When you go to exit, you're going to get a much higher multiple of revenues for your company if you have a strong presence in biopharm. So it's important to keep that in mind, and since the time to market is long, it's important to get into that market early so that you get penetration, so that at the time that the company is going through the liquidation event, you have a strong presence in that market. So you can't be looking at that as something that we're going to get into later because it's a difficult market to enter. You have to be looking at the long-term markets and getting into them early if they have a compelling value proposition. And that can either be they're the biggest win, or that they're going to have a significant impact on exit. So there's more to a market in terms of value than just the revenues you can generate there. There's also how is that perceived by investors, and that will have a huge impact. So this is partly how will it be perceived by Wall Street if you try to go for an IPO, and if you tried to get acquired by a company in the separation space, how do they value your business? And you can track the companies that were acquired by the companies that you would consider to be potential acquirers of your company, and you can see that the multiples are significantly higher if you have a presence in this market. This is another smart art graphic that I'm really excited about. So on this graph, I just showed the investors in a nice picture and then some colored writing, exactly what markets we were going to enter and when. So the green font was markets we were going to enter in that year, and the red font was markets that were going to be seeding at that stage, maybe doing some initial applications development, but not really commercially launching until the following year. So this is just to illustrate that when you're articulating your value proposition to investors, you want to try to make it as simple as possible for them to grasp what you're saying. And the easiest way to do that is with some kind of picture, or maybe a table, a graph, but not so much writing. So the easier you can make your message, the more impact it will have, and it's all about impact. I mean, we talk about elevator pitches. What can you convey to an investor in 30 seconds if you're stuck on the elevator with them? Your business plan needs to be like that. You need to have a really strong executive summary, and when you're discussing the market, it has to be quick, easy to digest messages that really show what you're going to do with the business and what that's going to mean to the investor. Advisory team. So particularly if this is your first venture, get the best possible advisory support team in place from the outset. Who is your advisory team? So it's your general corporate counsel. If you're looking at raising a venture capital round, you've got to have an attorney who's going to handle the financing transaction for you. Get recommendations from your investors. Go around and interview attorneys. So I had a number of recommendations from different parties, and went around and met with the attorneys, and some of them in person I just hated. So you're going to have a very close working relationship with this person, especially around the financing. You'll see more of them than you will of your children, your spouse, so make sure you can get along with them. I told every attorney that I interviewed that I'm online 24/7, and they would need to be too. And if they didn't want a high maintenance client, don't let me sign on with you, because neither one of us will be happy. So my attorney, Richard Kimmel at Airden Bayless, will respond to me at 11 o'clock at night when he's on vacation on the Cape with his family, and I like that about him. So we're both happy. He's not unhappy that I'm demanding, and I'm happy that he's responsive. So make sure you work with somebody who meets your needs and fits your personality. Choose someone who has experience with VC deals. You do not want to be educating your attorney. You do not want them learning on your dime. That's why it's a very good idea to ask your investors who they've worked with and who's been successful in the past. Even if it seems like the price tag on that attorney is higher than someone you could get locally or who's doesn't have any experience in VC deals, you will pay for them slowing down the transaction. And you never want to be the limiting reagent in a deal. So you always want to be the bottleneck to be on the investor side, never your counsel. Patent counsel, you're going to have strong IP representation to have credibility with the investors around your IP position. Financial team, so at a minimum when you're starting out, get a good accountant who can do the books for you. Even if you have nothing, you need an accountant who's going to be able to issue financial statements for the investors. It will be a requirement in the subscription agreement. And consultants as needed. I worked with one of Tony's colleagues for the first 2 years after starting Natrix. When I moved up from the States, I told the prospective investors, I needed a consultant who had experience starting businesses in Canada because I wasn't familiar with the Canadian system. So he got me the business numbers and set up our bank accounts and found places we could lease and figure out what you need, what you don't have on your team, and what you could outsource. So rather than bring on a lot of headcount, a lot of full-time resources, outsource part-time as much as you can. And financial is definitely one of those areas you can usually outsource part-time in the beginning. And there are venture management consultants, particularly in the Toronto area, who can be very helpful in mobilizing and starting up a company. Draw on paid advisors, mentors. Highly recommend finding a mentor if you possibly can. And relevant contacts for input on any draft term sheets received. So when you get a term sheet, get as many eyes on it as possible so that you can figure out what's negotiable and how you want to negotiate. Get your counsel's opinions on the legal ramifications of any reps and warranties. So they'll ask you to make representations and warranties that there's no outstanding litigation, that kind of thing. Make sure you get your counsel to advise you personally on what the implications are of the reps and warranties that you're attesting to. Use external input to ensure that your expectations for the deal are realistic. I've been fundraising with people for their companies where they're looking for a $30 million valuation on something that's not worth $10,000. You're never going to get it. So, be realistic. And if everybody's telling you that the terms that you're being offered are very fair, that they're at market, the valuation's reasonable, then go for it. Don't fight for something that's unrealistic because you aren't going to get it. You're not going to fool venture capitalists into giving you more than your company's worth. So, good advisors can help you determine which deal terms are negotiable and which are not. All investors will have certain points that they're not willing to move on, and you can spend a lot of time arguing over those because they figure it'll distract you away from the terms that actually are negotiable. So get external input, figure out where you can actually negotiate, and focus on those points. And managing the transaction. Every day you spend on the closing, and closings can dilate unbelievably. Costs you in legal fees. And to give you an example, when we closed on the seed round, we spent $75,000 on closing costs with the counsels involved, and it was considerably more with the $19 million transaction. So you're going to spend a lot of money on legal fees, and those were with aggressively managed transactions. So if you let the timelines dilate, if you don't stay on top, you will lose a lot of money in legal fees and you'll lose time and productivity because the company just won't be able to get started or move to the next milestone. So the company has to manage all parties involved. You cannot offload responsibility or abdicate responsibility for any part of closing the transaction. You have to manage the investors, your attorney, their attorneys, universities, whoever's involved, whoever's required to participate to get documentation signed off. Get a closing agenda in place as soon as possible. So ask the lead investor's attorney to provide a closing agenda. It's basically a to-do list. These are the things we're going to need in order to close the transaction. Assign each agenda item to a specific person. So some of the agreements will need to be drafted by investors' counsel. Some will be drafted by your counsel. If you need some kind of attestation from your IP counsel around freedom to operate, assign each of those items to a specific individual, set a due-by date, and have, at a minimum, weekly conference calls to track progress against those deliverables. Managing the transaction needs to be the company's top priority when you're going through a close. That the entire rest of the business relies on you closing this transaction. So make it your top priority, devote your best resources to it, hire consultants if you have to, but manage the heck out of that transaction. Remember that the closing costs for the company and the investors, so all of the money the investors' council's bill, comes out of your pocket, not the investors. So it is in your best interest to manage not only your own attorney, but their attorneys as well. So in summary, the 3 critical elements of a good deal are a strong business plan, a good advisory team, and an actively managed transaction. And the bottom line is take the money and run. If people are offering you money, take the money, build a business, and the rest will come. So thank you very much for having me.
Despite all these shots on venture capital.
I know. Aren't you supposed to be at soccer by now? I thought I could get away with all the shots.
We're good. So, open the floor for questions. Let me start off.
Oh.
Once you've landed the VC, how has your relationship been going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very, very fortunate. We have excellent investors who've been real advocates for the company. They've been very value-add. But I think the important thing is to remember that you're on the same side. A lot of CEOs will treat their board, their investors, as the enemy, and they're not at all. They can be really valuable assets to the company. And we specifically, when we were looking for the new external investor with the Series B, looked for somebody who we felt could add value in specific ways, so had a lot of experience with growing businesses at the rate we wanted to grow, or network in the right space, but absolutely leverage the investors, stay in close communication, communicate bad news faster than good news, but stay really close to your investors and you can have a great relationship with them. Keep them at arm's length and they will always be on your back because they will feel that they don't know what's going on with the company and it's their money, so they have a right to know.
I noticed the lawyers bit at the end, and something my wife said, she was assistant to counsel on a large company, and she said the trick is when you're dealing with lawyers, that you manage them.
Yeah.
And do you find the same thing? And the big question is, I'm looking at those numbers and it's kind of frightening. How did you, is this just years of experience and how to deal with them?
Well, I mean, I think, in my case, we actually brought on Tony's colleague, Joel Liederman, who had been a venture capitalist, to help manage the transaction and to help me understand from a Canadian VC perspective when we were going through term sheet negotiations, what deal terms would be negotiable up here, which are often quite different from what were negotiable in the States, so I needed that kind of background, so that you don't waste time arguing around terms that are non-negotiable. And then Joel is a wonderful nag. So he would call every attorney every day, and if we had something that was due by a certain date and it wasn't in, we would be on the phone, we would be emailing, we'd be putting pressure on the investors to put pressure on their counsel. If you can, and we did do this with the Series B, negotiate a cap on fees up front. So we will not pay more than $80,000 for the financing fees. And then the investors will be very aggressive about managing counsel as well because they will have to pay the difference. But you often can't negotiate a cap at the seed round, so you just have to stay on top of them. You have to micromanage.
When developing your IP portfolio, did you have to look elsewhere besides from Canada to put that together?
We did initially because we were looking at, we had the membrane IP and we were looking at device IP, so we looked at bringing in IP. We ended up working with OEMs who had their own IP, so that's how we accessed it rather than having to license ourselves. We definitely prosecuted outside of Canada, so we went through patent filings in the US, obviously, as well as Canada, and then in Europe and Asia. And you just have to decide for your business what kind of IP protection do you need, not just now, but ultimately to appeal to the potential acquirers. No, I mean, any good attorney will be completely loyal to the client. You never want to use, obviously, the same counsel that's representing your investor on a deal, but no good counsel would do that. And you should be smart enough to figure out if you have the same counsel, there's a big problem with ethics all around. But any good attorney will represent you. Our attorney works very often on the VC side, particularly for Venn Growth, who's not an investor of ours. But that makes him very well qualified to handle the financing transaction. So he was a recommendation from the investors and has been very solid. And the investors are going to know the counsels who know VC deals better than you are. They just definitely are.
And I would just add to that, as an investor, if I am recommending somebody, if there's any whiff that I'm steering you somewhere that will actually come out in my favor, if things go sour, that will come up and it will just rebound on me big time. So I would just assume that you have good, competent counsel who knows the game, so that you know the entrepreneur can never say, oh gee, I didn't have good counsel, you took advantage of me. That's more of an issue in the States, which is more litigious.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't worry. They will be perfectly honest. They'll give you good advice.
What did your staffing look like prior to the seed round and prior to commencing?
Yeah, so prior to the seed round, there was no staff. I had just had my third child and was just hanging out at home, waiting to close the transaction. When we started the company, there were 6 of us, 5 scientists and myself. So we were very much R&D focused for the first 2 years, and then really saw a big growth over the last year and a half, 2 years. But you can run very lean early on and still get a lot done.
So prior to getting the 19 million in, you had
Probably about 20 people at that stage.
all functions covered.
In all functions, yeah. Yes.
At what stage of your company did you start marketing, and what kind of marketing techniques or strategies did you engage in?
So initially, our marketing was really me going out to conferences, me giving talks places. It was very much focused on, you know, here's technically what we're capable of. It wasn't around branding. We really let the product generate its own credibility and speak for itself for a long time, and we didn't bring on a VP of marketing until last January. And at that point, Chris was very focused on branding, so getting brand recognition for our company and the products, whereas before I'd really been trying to get recognition for the technology. So we didn't do any advertising. It was all very much focused on getting credibility with the end user. And it's such a cliche, but you know, under promise, over deliver. Make sure that the technology is real, get a lot of end user feedback, then worry about marketing and advertising and branding. But you know, get a little bit of credibility with your target population first, and then the rest of it is a lot easier.
You mentioned that you only filed the IP after you got the first round of funding.
No, we continued patent prosecution with the fund. So the university had filed the IP. It issued not too long after we started the company. I don't remember the timing exactly, but no, the IP had already been filed. Yeah, if you have no IP filed, it would be very difficult to raise, because that's the only asset you have. You know, that's the only collateral you have is your IP at that stage.
Was it easy to find staff around there?
It was. I mean, the Toronto area is a real hub for biotech, so for what we were doing, incredible access to highly qualified personnel. We have some really, really strong people on the team. Yes?
I just want to actually get a better idea of how you were operating. You know, as you said, when you had your third child, and you didn't have money yet, did you?
No, not at that stage.
So, what were you guys were just trying to get your technology to work?
Right. We had a concept, and we're looking for money to do proof of concept, proof of principle experiments. So that was really what we were pitching at that point. Is
You were pitching to different people to try to get money at that point.
right,
You
right.
had a concept, but you didn't really have a working.
We really had nothing. Yeah, we really had nothing, and we were lucky to get $2 million at that stage. What we had was technology that probably would work and significant market potential, and that's why I say your business plan has to focus on the market and not on how cool the technology is or how well it works. I mean, you have to have a limited technical risk, but you have to really focus on the market.
So you had a cool technology and a good business plan, and then you got
Yeah.
a couple million.
Yeah.
How much do you think you spent, prior to getting that
None. I mean, the technology was with the university. We didn't invest any funds.
The guy in the lab at school.
Right. Yeah, it was two professors, Ron Childs and Alicia Mika, and they got NSERC money, OCE money, MMO.
But I would,
You put in a year of your time?
I put in a year of my time. I was a professor at Mac for 2 years, and probably 18 months of that I was arguing with the university to let the technology out and become a business, but it doesn't necessarily always take that much time.
what I would say is with university technologies, there's no money spent in the company.
Yeah.
But there's a rather ill-defined, possibly large amount that was spent in research. It's hard to say, well, what was actually devoted to this technology and which was part of a broader front. But academic technologies, you do have the advantage of significant amounts of money moving it to the stage
Yeah.
that it can make the transition out.
Yeah,
As
absolutely.
opposed to being at home in your garage and needing to move it to that stage
Yeah.
where you can get something to put in, even the concept in front of an investor.
Yeah, very true.
So following up with that, how much does the university own?
I think that they are now about 0.4%. I was it was really the first significant startup out of Mac, so I was just very inflexible in the negotiations. They're probably not going to do that twice, but you know, I'm okay with that.
That was a good deal. And my question is twofold. In terms of that, I do think that starting a university is a great idea. And going to these NSERC things is popular. So maybe well-defined risks of what the university might lay claim to if you were to take those programs and use it to develop it. And especially universities, say like University of Toronto, which I guess I'm very strongly affiliated with, but they seem like bigger jerks.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that one, but.
They are sticklers with like administrative things. So I was wondering what one could expect in dealing with that in terms of what the university might retain and how much of a stranglehold they would typically have on a project. And then I guess one other question, which is maybe similar to that, is what about provisional patents? I'm just curious if you would have deals with that in terms of pre-seed money or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably get some funds off of a provisional, provided that you can get some legal opinion that it's likely to be patentable, that there's good freedom to operate. So you're going to end up having to the investors are going to do more due diligence around that patent because it's not an issued patent, it's not even an application yet, it's just a provisional. But you can definitely get funding with a provisional. In terms of the universities, there are very, very big differences in the way that different Canadian universities and American universities approach commercializing technologies. So it's very, very easy to work with the University of Waterloo. It may be a little more challenging with the University of Toronto. I'm a big proponent of universities doing what they're best at. So discovery, growing technologies and intellectual property to a certain point, and then if it's going to be commercialized, letting it go. Because universities' mandate is not to become rich off of people's inventions. It's to try to foster development of innovation, and that's really where their strength lies. But getting involved in commercialization and either handcuffing inventors so that they can't raise money because the terms are unattractive to venture capitalists, or wanting involvement in the day-to-day operations of a company where they don't have expertise to bring to bear, I'm not a big fan of that. So you definitely may have more of an argument with certain universities than with others, but you want to try to make this a win for all parties. So if you can work out some kind of deal where they have a non-dilutable founders' shares in the company, it's better to just give up the equity but get the IP. And ideally, you want to try to get ownership of the IP and not a license. And that's going to be much more attractive from a fundraising perspective.
At U of T, you can elect to take ownership yourself. It's your choice. Either you can get, and then it is, you're absolutely right. Then there's an assignment to you, and the deal is you give the university 25% of whatever revenues or equity you get. Or they could take it, and then it's flipped, and you only get 25%. So that's the basic deal at U of T.
Yeah, that's a really bad deal. Yeah,
Really?
yeah, that's offensive. 25%, that's offensive. So if anybody from U of T wants to give me a call, we can try to work through something that's more appropriate. So that's just handcuffing business and development in Canada. I mean, you want new ventures to grow. That supports the economy. I'm not going to go off on a tirade, but that's totally inappropriate. So 25%, no.
No, 25%, not of the company.
Of the revenues. You're not going to be able to get a...
25% of the inventor stake. So if the
Oh, all
inventor
right.
gets, if the inventor gets 40% of the
All right, you said revenues, Tony. You
Sorry.
really scared me there.
I meant the portion that goes back.
There was going to be a
at the
tirade.
stake.
I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah.
So,
Okay. All right,
the
that's not
inventor
totally
owns-
unreasonable.
If you get 40% and the investors get 60, then they get 25%
Yeah.
of that 40. So
But
they
that's
get
if you're the
10%.
inventor. I mean, you may be trying to license a technology you didn't invent.
Yes.
And I don't know what the deal terms are there, but you know, it's something you have to address with the tech transfer office. And there usually is some flexibility. You just have to get in and try to negotiate with the university and make it a win for all parties. Okay, thank you.
Fine. Would you join me in thanking Lisa?
Oh, thank you.